Hi, I'm Amberly, and welcome to Transmuting Chaos. And this is Ananda. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're working on pronouncing my name. Me too. Yeah, Ananda. It
Okay.
means bliss in Sanskrit, but the vowel sounds are a little funny in English.
I've tried saying it a couple times in my head, but I'll get it down.
You're doing great.
Um, okay, so you worked for Google, and then after you quit, you started having these neurological attacks, or
Well,
from,
look, my story, starts really when I was a kid. A lot of people don't realize it, but um, we have something called karyotypes. Every single person has not only a gender but a karyotype that designates certain things that are special about how their brain and body work, and
Mhm.
how they connect to the rest of nature. And so-called neurodiverse brains. There's certain brains that come out of the womb and they're wired differently. They're connected much more directly with the forces of nature, and which is both good and not so good. It's good in the sense that you have a lot of capability to understand what's happening even outside of your own eyes, because you can plug into the different energy waves around you. It's bad in that you're different than everybody else, um, and it's often hard to coexist between kind of the energy world that your brain was born into versus the sense world. And so, anyways, the United States for a long time, for really after World War II, decided, hey, we want to have a lot of these kind of people, these differently wired brains in our country, because what we've learned is that our enemies are using these so-called energy talented kids to wage war in an invisible fashion on us. And so World War II, and Vietnam, a lot of this has been written up, but folks, realize that people that are wired like that can do certain things in terms of forecasting the future, understanding alternate dimensions, and influencing people in a lot of ways. And
Right.
so my story, starts back when I was a kid, because I was labeled as one of these differently wired kids. And in particular, if you came from India as part of a certain immigration program, parents were basically required to give your kid over to, they called it, gifted and talented, but really it was experimentation. It was government experimentation. And
Wow.
so, you wouldn't believe, how much LSD I consumed under the age of 10, these kinds of things.
That's funny
And
because I started early too doing that. I mean, just like around 14, I started tripping. But
is that,
yeah,
yeah, and so it's like, what's interesting is that people, okay, you have a timeline of events. You go to school, you graduate, you get a job, and it's all material and physical. But
mhm,
in the energy realm, you also, everything is kept track of, all the interactions
right,
in every trip, every time. And so the real crime in all of this is that people continuously think, even though they know otherwise, that okay, you can take a kid, put them in an extended state of consciousness using LSD or whatever,
uh,
have them do a bunch of things, and then come back, and it's no big deal because the body hasn't changed. Like, it's not like you punched him in the eye. But the truth is, anytime you're communing with the rest of nature and expressing an intent and receiving information back, that if you're doing it in a way that's not aligned with your purpose, it creates trauma, tremendous
right.
trauma. And so, throughout my entire life, I've been, selected for these kinds of experimentation type programs, both above the table and more often below the table, through backroom deals that I wasn't aware of. And so, my story in a nutshell, I spent about 20 years in the technology industry, recovered from the childhood stuff that I went through. Um, but everybody other than me was still paying attention to my subconscious power, not my conscious power. And so, employers like Google are very skilled at finding ways to tap into employees' conscious talents, what they do from 9 to 6, but then
Yeah.
also what they do overnight. a lot of people don't realize the way that our brains are wired, the way the universe works um, is let's say you have a job today to go plant a garden, and you do it a particular way, and it takes you 5 hours, and there's probably 1,000 decisions you have to make in the process, micro decisions. Your brain is keeping track of not only those decisions, but all the other ones that you didn't take. And then when you sleep, we get tapped into the rest of nature, which is a giant computer, and it simulates all of those alternative possibilities so that the next morning you can potentially do something better than you did the day before. And so it's a remarkable infrastructure. And most of us are not aware of how to use it because it's been hidden from us, and people tell us dreams don't matter, and all this shit. And but employers have known about this for a long time, at least since the 60s and 70s, and have whole hosts of different ways of basically putting their employees in a continuous fear state, and having people inside the company that they subconsciously worship because they got to get promoted or they got to keep their job or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you're basically end up giving over your dream states to other people that can tap into them. And again, it seems like it might be a victimless crime or whatever, but the data shows it's not victimless at all. We now have data like ECG data that shows, hey, look, this person's got an HRV, heart rate variability, which measures to some extent whether you're in REM sleep, that is, way below what it should be for their age. Something's happening here. And so that's that kind of, I call it dream raping, but that kind of subconscious abuse is prevalent. We're talking at least millions of people, if not tens of millions of people in the United States alone. Now at Google has, I was at Google for almost 10 years, probably 8.5 years in total. And it was Google's core business is mind control. Ultimately, if you really look at it, they control the truth. If it doesn't rank in Google, it's not true. So it's always from the very beginning been funded by DoD types and sanctioned and so forth, because the dream was, hey, look, America can control the truth. If America has Google, it controls the truth. And so, Larry Page, who's somebody I worked with back in 2012, 2013, one of the founders, he's living in the future. The guy sees things decades in advance. He's got a comfortable perch, and he's got people like me that he can hire to also help him. But Google has been working on truly comprehensive mind control for ever since it began. And so my journey with Google was to see different parts of that octopus, if you will. I started off in the search engine, then I went over into a company called Sidewalk Labs. It was part of Alphabet that was doing city level planning and optimization, putting things like sensors in public areas to monitor street traffic and flows and so forth. And then more recently working in the AI division under a guy named Jeff Teen, who's renowned in the AI space, working on tools for human productivity and trying to make people more productive with AI. I finally left in 2021, in April. I wasn't fully aware of all the subconscious abuse at that point in time, but I was plenty aware of conscious abuse. I was experiencing all kinds of discrimination. I'm a different kind of person. I'm trans and brown. Yeah. I'm going into a place that's got tremendous height. It looks like it's a playful place with balls and so forth, but there's all kinds of hierarchy and hidden unions and castes and cabals and militias. Believe it or not, it's unbelievable. And so I finally left, and most people that leave Google are pretty quiet about it. They move on to some other job, because in Silicon Valley, it's a small family. If you anger Google, you're not going to get a job at Apple. You're not going to get a VC check for your startup. It's a club where bad things are always hidden. And so I said, fuck it. I had enough money to live for a little bit, and I had plenty of business ideas that I said, I'm going to speak the truth. And so for the last year, I've been speaking the truth about Google's mind control efforts in a number of different channels. And I faced all kinds of abuse as a result of that.
So, later on, I want to get into actually what we can do as a positive outcome out of this, because there are very talented, amazing people that are like out of jobs now because we've all like woke up to this abuse. And I think all of this sounds frightening, but the outcome is going to be just amazing with what we actually end up doing.
Totally.
But what do you think that they are like? This is what I don't understand. Why have, I guess, a bunch of human beings as robots to like control them and their psychic abilities to do what is the end game is what I'm wondering. I mean, if you already control all this stuff and you think AI is so great or whatever, then why do you need us?
Well, that's a great question. Look, the dream that every single person in that little world has, people like Jeff Dean, is that they can create a machine that can do anything. That's when they wake up in the morning, that's
God. Yeah, a God machine.
It's a funny little subculture, by the way, because you go in there and you're like, hey, what's in it for humans? And they're like, well, if we have this machine, it can help humans. And so Silicon Valley is not a place that's known for humanistic thinking, really. And so I think I'll give you a few different answers to the question. The base level is just about power. Okay, you have a group of people that have been in power for, depending on how you look at it, for centuries, a couple thousand years, and want to stay in power. It's that simple. They look at Earth like a big video game, and they want to be the owners of the video game. And they're incredibly dissociated from regular people because they live in a bubble. They live in a place where there's only people like themselves. They go into an office where there's only people like themselves, and everybody there worships them. So they got no clue what the real world thinks of them. I remember last year I went to visit my hometown in Peoria, Illinois, and went kayaking with my brother, who coincidentally is an independent service provider of the CIA. And we went kayaking down a stream. We aren't the closest, let's put it that way. And we ended up in this little town kind of on the west side of Peoria, where you got working class people that have been there for decades. And we docked the kayak, went and got a beer. And the folks there are the kind of folks that have been hit really hard. All their jobs have been outsourced, just lack of respect, you name it.
Right.
Mostly white on that side of the river. On the opposite side of the river, it's mostly black. Same raw deal, different story. Mm-hmm. And I started talking to one of them, and he asked me, what I did, and I had to explain at the time I worked for Google. And immediately he's like, hey, can you fix my credit report? Can you fix it? And then they kind of went off on all these things where the regular person, sees Google as this omnipresent, omnipotent force. Mm-hmm. That is not good, but it's there. It's like the government, it's just like
it's almost become more powerful than the government, and
it has because the government's outsourced their brain to it. And so I think the people inside this bubble don't quite realize how much they've boiled the frog, if you will. That's kind of one answer to your question. The other answer to your question is that what do they want? Look, I think they want their own dimension of Earth, ultimately. They want to have a dimension of Earth for rich people, for certain elite castes, and everybody else is a robot. They don't care if it's a silicon robot, a bio robot, something that looks like a human, but that's their end game. We talk about, you see these things from DoD on the Avatar program and so forth. That's all real shit.
Yeah.
The way that our holoverse works, it is possible to fork a dimension, to take over an existing dimension, if you consolidate enough power. And so that's their end game. It aligns with a lot of different religious people's end games, by the way. The Vatican, Mormons, all believe, they won't say it to your face, but they all believe in a special dimension called heaven just for their people. Where everybody has 100% pleasure. Well, believe me, I know the way the holoverse works, and that means that some slaves got a lot of pain. And
Yeah.
so it's the same shit for 2,000 years. It's just getting repackaged in different forms.
Yes. And what I experienced is actually that they are trying to actually make this realm almost like a video game. Like they want it, and it already is for them, but what I saw was like they're trying to do like this fake human avatar thing with radiation, where it's actually like you're in a real like video game. That's what I experienced. And I went into a lot of different plans that they have for that, and I'll get into more of that like in my videos, but it's
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things that's so tricky about all this stuff is that every person feels so. Okay, just a vocabulary check. Like when I talk about there's sense reality and energy reality. Sense reality, I think about is what we're doing right now, even though it's over a digital call.
right.
I'm moving my arms and legs, and there's a time element, and I'm expressing certain moods. And so I think about that as our 5-dimensional sense reality. The 3 dimensions for space, 1 for time, and then 1 for mood, which I'll come back to later. And then you have your energy reality, which is infinite. There's infinite dimensions in every direction. And one of the things that's tricky is that when people like us meet each other that are that have expanded states of consciousness, often our experience in the sense realm is pretty similar, but our experience in the energy realm is totally different because I'm playing over here, you're playing over here, and your body's really special in this way, and my body's really special in this way.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned that because certain things like I've never, in my visual field, I've almost never seen anything unusual, so to speak. But with my eyes closed, I see everything. And in the energy realm. And so one of the things that I find really fun about meeting you and kind of hearing your story and others is that I'm having to kind of zoom out myself and say, oh, what is it that you've experienced? And how does that map to my world? And so one of them, just if I can continue on that thread, you talk about AIs, being a part of you or being attached to you in some form. And I'll give you an example of something that's similar, but I use different language, just from my perspective. So I've been struggling with all kinds of different neuroweapons attacks for the last 12 months, but in particular, there's a chakra hole that's been placed on the back of my throat chakra. And if you're familiar with the chakra system, that is the linchpin. That is what allows you to be an integrated whole and express your truth. It's pure wiring, and it is an incredibly sophisticated hold that's been put on me. This is something where this is not Kundalini 101 kind of shit. And so what's happened in the back end is you've had people that have taken Kundalini, which is a science, for the last 40 years under wraps and reverse engineered every single piece of it to the point now where they can stream viruses, digital pain viruses, that store, essentially instructions for your body to do the wrong thing, to compress nerves in bad spots. It's like if you've ever used a TENS machine in a gym or one of these, it's like electrostimulation to relax your muscles, essentially. They're doing that in reverse. They're sending TENS-like signals over the air.
I could barely breathe like for a year because my solar plexus, it's like there's a magnetic band around it. I still feel it kind of, but it was so tight, like I could barely breathe.
I mean, I believe it's just remarkable what's possible. And and so I think that us talking is really helpful because our brains are really smart. And once our brains have a mental model for what's attacking us, well, we can fight back. We can talk more about sort of how to prevent this kind of stuff and how to move on. But by far the number one most important thing you can do is to have an integrated spinal column, meaning mind control stuff works typically by taking over one center, particularly parts of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got good spinal connection into your gut is a completely independent brain and is much harder, much more sophisticated, ironically, than this brain in a lot of ways. Much
Mm-hmm.
harder for EM weapons to directly target that. And so, something we can touch on later, but having your full body talking to itself is really critical.
Right. And that's what they have done. I mean, like stop the flow of all of your energy. So yeah, it's
Exactly. And
very,
look, at the end of the day, we're one of the things that's really hard about this is in the West, we're brainwashed into this physical reality, and then the energy stuff.
yeah,
Maybe you hit 35 or 40 and you have an awakening, but you've got all these physical mental models stuck in your brain. At the end of the day, we're just little antennas that got to plug ourselves in the ground and receive energy. And so a lot of the attacks on us are very simple. In the last two houses I lived in, the utility grounds were loosened from the main
Mm.
box. Coincidentally, how does that happen? And yeah, you've got a bunch of stray electrons in the ground. You're not going to be communing with God very easily. And so,
Yeah.
if you start to look at it from their perspective and you say, okay, I'm Larry Page and I own Joe Biden and the DOD or whatever. And I've got certain people out there that are rogue antennas. They're really smart and special, but they're not on my team. Well, I'm going to bend the antenna. I'm going to unplug it. I'm going to keep moving it around so it never entrains itself with nature. And I can do
Yeah.
all of this stuff very quietly because they're all fucking cowards, through remote techniques.
Yes.
And so it's the there's different categories of people that are affected. I think that there's folks like me, or I don't know enough about your background, or you that are intentionally targeted based on actions we took in the conscious domain.
Uh-huh.
Like in my case, speaking out against Google or ritual abuse or so forth. But the much bigger category are people that are just doing their thing, and they happen to live in a place that Google or the United States various departments decide they want to mood control or mind control. And so the biggest thing that is really shocking is that we have this new type of digital colonialism where we can go into a country like India, for example, and YouTube now is a huge percentage of what people do on their phones. And so if you think about the 5G waves, Google controls a bunch of the 5G waves that touch people's brains. And so if you're operating in a country like that and you get a prime minister like Modi who likes some people and doesn't like some people, typical populist leader, you can actually shift moods of the populations you don't like. And so there's really remarkably dangerous things we're doing where we're going from scaling up what used to require variable cost per person to do mind control attacks. Now it's you can deploy it en masse in large areas, and so that's really changing things.
Well, I'll talk to you one day on the phone about everything that, like, I mean, this is all a huge concoction that they've been putting into us for so long, between the chemicals and pharmaceuticals and our food, the subliminals that we've had in TV. All of this is like for the end game. And they've collected all of this information on us. They can literally make you a private hell, like seriously. Visually and emotionally, everything. Like they can literally tap into you and just use all of this. And so that's why I'm really trying to get out ways to like clear out your subliminal mind and your body and everything so that, as many people as we can are clear, because we're the ones that'll be able to trigger other people to
Totally.
like really
Well,
wake
look,
up.
I think you're pointing out something that's really important, which is this stuff's not new. Okay, it's been going on for
Yeah.
decades.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the reasons that today is different is the United States is no longer in control of the world. So every government has had programs like this for a long time.
Right.
But the United States, because of the close cooperation between large global private companies and DoD, has had by far the largest reach of mind control network. And another part of this is, meridian control. So there's humans you control, but there's nature that you also want to control. Which parts of the world are going to rain? Which ones aren't going to rain? And if you zoom out, which should Earth always be the third planet from the sun? Believe it or not, it's not always been that. And so there's so meridian control is another area where the United States has been dominant for many decades. And I think what's finally happened really in the last few months is we're seeing a crash of that world order. And it's an entire web. The United States is allied with the Vatican, which controls huge numbers of meridians around the world, in terms of where their church facilities are, as well as mines. Is allied with certain governments like India and so forth. And so I think the exciting thing now is we have much more of a multipolar world coming into the picture. And but it's a tricky transition. And one of the things in particular that's really tricky about it is a lot of the technology that's been put out there to do mind control from places like Google are remarkably insecure. Anyone can either clone a system like that now that they put the template out there, or if you're a bad inside actor, you can do things with it, or outside. And I think what's happening, the period we're in right now, the reason it's so I think destabilized is that the direct energy weapons that were once the province of only the United States or only the KGB are now in the hands of lots of people. And so that's it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting times until we resettle into a new order.
Well, yeah, and they have created this prison for us, but they've made it themselves. You know what I mean? They've made this prison for themselves, so they're making it even a tighter box doing all of this. But
well, yeah, the whole thing. Look, I think if I put myself in the shoes of somebody in the controlling caste, if you will, someone like a Larry Page, but maybe older, they've built up a stack of lies decades long, and the problem is all these things are connected. So for example, so I'm really interested in the science of cannabis and the health impacts of cannabis. Well, it turns out if you view the world as a hologram, which it is, then understanding the impact of cannabis, which is a fundamentally multimodal plant, meaning it's got smell, touch, it stimulates all the senses, starts to become a lot easier. It becomes a calibration source for your hologram if you use it in the right way. And so there's a whole science of holographic reality and energy medicine that's been censored for decades. And we've got gobs of research on, unconsented kids and so forth that have gone through these. And what's happening now is we're sort of legalizing these things now rapidly. And people are starting to realize that there's miracles are possible and so forth. But the elite are sitting there. They know exactly how this could play out. Something like cannabis in the right hands could have a huge deflationary impact on most of the healthcare spend. There's probably 80% of chronic conditions we could solve. And they're very tightly controlling the actual deployment of it because they've got investments in healthcare assets. And so one of the things that's tricky is they've got this web of lies from things that they've done in the past and have hidden. And now as society progresses, some of those things are becoming relevant again. And they've got a choice to make. Do you come out and share the truth, or do you continue? And honestly, I think that there will be a lot of people that just say this is ridiculous. I mean,
it is ridiculous.
It's
I mean, we know you've been fucked up and evil, so just come out and say it.
And it's so exactly. And so I think at some point in time, if you think about this as a serious video game, and by the way, I think that analogy is very useful. As we'll get into it later, but if you think about it as a serious video game where people's lives matter, even the dark side has to have some fun. Okay, or they're going to stop playing. And I think it's getting harder and harder for them to keep up the deception every single day, every single second.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I mean, they've made like a jail for themselves, I mean, I don't know. But I can't get into the mindset of some of the things that they've done. I've tried, I've tried putting myself into their shoes, and I'm just like, I don't know how you get that far.
I think the way that I've tried to think about it is through the lens of the entire natural kingdom, and for instance, animals too. And I think that the way that I love dogs. I think dogs are every bit as intelligent as us in different ways. They're incredible beings. But look, we treat dogs a little bit like slaves. They
Yeah.
do what what we tell them, which is different than how they evolved. They were meant to be companions. And I think that elite people view us as dogs. They don't view us as the same kind of being. That's how the caste system is. This is all in my mind about the modern caste system. And so, in a caste system, you have all kinds of tiny ways to embed oneness inside the group and separation apart. Your voice tone when you talk to a lowly barista is different than your voice tone when you talk to one of your cabal buddies.
Yeah.
And so there's thousands of these things where when they interact in the real world, I had this former friend of mine, Adrian, who is one of these classic cabal connected people, where we were biking together on the Golden Gate Bridge. A construction worker was doing work, and wanted him to get off his bike and move around, and the guy starts yelling the shit out of him, just like, you're a piece of shit, you're a piece of trash construction worker, what the fuck are you doing? And people like that just do not view working class folks or pedigree people as worth being protected. So
Yeah.
it's in other words, it's not like a conscious decision they're making. I'm gonna treat you like shit. It's programmed deeply into their being.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's do this again another time. I don't want to make videos too long, but thank you very, very much. This was really fascinating.
Awesome. Well, by the way, I don't know what you're thinking about in terms of the posting or whatever. Maybe we should do another one and do the best of, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We can do
Yeah.
it later this week, just because I feel
Yeah.
like there's so much, like I'm still learning your body language. I'm still learning this space, how to talk with you about it. And so I feel like another session might be cool.
Okay. All right. I'll send you this one too.
Awesome.
All
Thanks,
right.
Sam.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.